Once upon a time, in a distant land far from the bustling, noisy cities, there lived a little girl named Mary Lennox. Mary was an orphan, and her life had been a lonely one from the very start. Her parents, wealthy but distant, had never shown her affection or warmth. She was a child who seemed to be surrounded by luxury but was utterly neglected emotionally. Her parents had passed away when she was just a baby, leaving her to be raised by servants who did little more than tend to her basic needs. They would give her food, shelter, and clothes, but not love, and certainly not the joy of childhood. Mary was an unhappy little girl, full of complaints and grievances. She was spoiled and temperamental, and those around her avoided her as much as possible. She would throw tantrums at the slightest inconvenience, and her only companions were the servants who obeyed her commands. The world, to Mary, was a dull and empty place. She saw no beauty in it and had no love for anything, until one fateful day when her life was about to change forever. One day, a terrible epidemic of cholera swept through the area where Mary lived, and in a cruel twist of fate, both her parents succumbed to the illness. The tragedy left Mary an orphan, and she was sent to live with her uncle, Archibald Craven, who lived in a large, mysterious mansion called Misselthwaite Manor. The manor was isolated, sitting at the edge of a bleak moor, far from any town or village. Archibald Craven, a reclusive man, rarely visited Misselthwaite and had spent most of his life grieving for his late wife, who had died years earlier. It was in this gloomy, desolate place that Mary would begin to experience the true meaning of transformation. Upon arriving at Misselthwaite, Mary was greeted by her new caretaker, a stern woman named Mrs. Medlock. Mrs. Medlock explained that Mary was not allowed to explore the grounds of the manor or roam about freely. The mansion was large, and Mary soon realized it was filled with many locked doors. It was a place where the light seemed to be shut out, and even the air felt heavy, as though it were burdened by sadness. Mrs. Medlock told Mary that her uncle, Mr. Craven, was seldom at home and that there was little for her to do. The house seemed like an imposing fortress, its many rooms dark and dreary. Mary spent her days wandering the long hallways of the manor, feeling more and more alone. But in the midst of her isolation, one day, while exploring the mansion, she came across a peculiar thing: a door. It was hidden behind ivy and roses, and it stood at the end of a narrow passageway. The door was locked, and there was a keyhole but no visible key. Intrigued by this mysterious door, Mary became obsessed with finding the key. She asked Mrs. Medlock about it, but the housekeeper simply told her that it was not something for Mary to concern herself with. It was a forbidden place and no one was allowed to enter. However, Mary's curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. She knew that the door held a secret, a mystery that she was determined to uncover. It was on one of her explorations that she met a young maid named Martha, who had worked at Misselthwaite for years. Martha was a kind and honest girl who had heard stories about the secret garden. She shared with Mary the legend of the garden, how it had once been a beautiful, vibrant place, full of flowers, birds, and sunlight. But after Mrs. Craven's death, the garden had been locked away, never to be seen again. Mary was told that no one ever spoke about it, and that it was said to be the place where her uncle's sorrow had taken root. Mary's heart stirred as she listened to Martha's tale, and she became more determined to find the garden. It was as though the very idea of a secret garden, hidden and neglected, called out to her. Perhaps, she thought, the garden held the answers to the emptiness she felt inside. Maybe the garden could heal her too, just as it once healed the sorrow of her uncle. She knew, without a doubt, that she had to find it. Through her persistence, Mary eventually uncovered the secret key to the garden. One rainy afternoon, after a series of secretive inquiries and accidental discoveries, she managed to unlock the door and enter the garden. What she found took her breath away. The garden was wild, overgrown, and unkempt, but even in its disarray, there was something undeniably magical about it. The air was fresh, the flowers were vibrant, and the entire place seemed to pulse with life, even though it had been abandoned for so many years. Mary couldn't help but smile as she explored the overgrown pathways, the brambles, and the hidden nooks. She decided then and there that she would bring the garden back to life. And so, she began to tend to it. Every day after her lessons, Mary would slip away to the garden, where she would prune, water, and clear the weeds. Slowly but surely, the garden began to change. It began to bloom again, just as Mary's heart began to change, too. It wasn't long before Mary made another extraordinary discovery. As she spent more time in the garden, she met a boy named Dickon. Dickon was Martha's brother, a country boy with an infectious love for nature and animals. He was always surrounded by animals, birds, squirrels, and even a few wild rabbits that followed him wherever he went. Dickon, like Mary, had an innate understanding of the natural world. He had a deep connection to the earth, and he understood the way plants and creatures responded to care and love. Dickon helped Mary in her quest to restore the garden, teaching her how to care for the plants and how to make them flourish once more. He brought seeds and tools and showed her how to nurture the soil so that the flowers, fruits, and vegetables would grow. With Dickon's help, the secret garden began to bloom in earnest. It wasn't just a garden of flowers anymore. It became a symbol of hope and renewal. The once dead land was filled with life once again, just as Mary herself was being filled with warmth and light. But the secret of the garden wasn't the only one Mary uncovered. She also discovered that her uncle, Mr. Craven, had a son, Colin Craven, a sickly and bedridden boy who had been shut away in his own room for most of his life. Colin was Mr. Craven's only child, but because of his frail health, he had been kept hidden away, out of sight from the world. Colin was a pale and sorrowful boy, and he had convinced himself that he would never walk or see the world outside of his sick room. One day, after Mary's persistence, Colin finally agreed to meet her. When they first met, Colin was bitter and full of self-pity. He did not believe that he could ever be happy or healthy again. But Mary, who had discovered the power of the secret garden to heal her own heart, was determined to show Colin the same. She encouraged him to leave his room and join her in the garden. Though he resisted at first, Mary's persistence paid off, and Colin eventually agreed to go. As soon as Colin stepped outside into the fresh air, he began to feel something he had never experienced before: hope. The sun touched his face, and the air seemed to fill his lungs in a way he had never known. The secret garden worked its magic on him, just as it had on Mary. Colin's body, once frail and weak, began to grow stronger as he spent more time in the garden, breathing in the fresh air and basking in the sunlight. Mary and Dickon continued to tend the garden, and in the process they helped Colin discover that his body was capable of strength and health. With time, he gained confidence, began walking, and slowly shed his self-doubt. The transformation of Colin was a remarkable one. As he grew healthier, his outlook on life changed. He began to understand that there was more to living than merely existing. He began to see that the world was full of wonder, and he no longer felt trapped by his sickness. He learned that the secret garden had the power to heal not just his body, but also his heart. As the seasons passed, Misselthwaite Manor was transformed. Too, the once dreary mansion seemed to come alive with warmth, and its halls echoed with laughter and joy. The garden, once hidden and neglected, had become a symbol of the love and care that had flourished within it. And as for Mary, Colin, and Dickon, they found in each other a bond that could not be broken, an unbreakable friendship forged by their shared love for the secret garden. The story of the secret garden teaches us that healing and transformation are possible, even in the most unexpected places. It shows us that love, care, and patience can bring life to even the most desolate of places, and that, like the garden, we, too, can bloom again. When we open our hearts to the world and to each other, we can discover the beauty that has been hidden all along. In the end, the secret garden wasn't just a place. It was a metaphor for the healing that happens when we nurture what's inside of us. Just as the garden grew and flourished, so did Mary, Colin, and the people around them, as they learned to love, care, and cherish one another. The garden had been a secret, but in the end, it became the key to their happiness. A secret they all shared, and a secret that would stay with them forever. Stay tuned for more enlightening content. Head over to www.mybooksummary.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share the magic with friends. And let's grow together through the power of books and interesting stories.